Have you ever felt like you're being watched? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck? That feeling that something isn't quite right? Tonight's story might just keep you up wondering about the footprints outside your window. If you enjoy this tale of mysterious disappearances in a small American town, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to hear more stories that will have you checking your locks twice before bed. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something you just couldn't explain. Now, let's begin our story. I never believed in the unexplainable until I moved to Pinewood Springs. A sleepy town nestled between the Adirondack Mountains where everyone knows everyone, and strangers stick out like a lighthouse on a moonless night. I bought a fixer-upper on the edge of town, backing up to acres of dense forest that stretched toward the mountains. The house was nothing special. Just a two-story colonial with peeling white paint and creaky floorboards that had been on the market for almost 2 years. "You got yourself a bargain, Mr. Mitchell," the realtor had said, jangling the keys before dropping them into my palm. "Not many folks want to live this close to the tree line." She glanced toward the forest with an expression I couldn't quite read. Especially not after what happened to the Carlson family. I should have asked what she meant. Instead, I was too captivated by the golden October sunlight filtering through the trees, painting the forest floor in warm hues of amber and crimson. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a wind chime played a gentle melody that made this place feel like home already. "I'm sure I'll be fine," I said, pocketing the keys. "I grew up in Chicago. Nothing in these woods could be scarier than rush hour on Lakeshore Drive." The realtor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, welcome to Pinewood Springs, Mr. Mitchell. If you need anything, my office is on Main Street." She hesitated before adding, "Just be mindful of the woods after dark." I brushed off her warning as small-town superstition, something to scare city folk who didn't know a raccoon from a bear. That first night, I slept better than I had in years, lulled by the symphony of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves outside my window. It wasn't until morning that I noticed them. Footprints in the dewy grass. They started at the edge of the forest and led directly to my back porch before vanishing completely. Human footprints. Barefoot. Not large enough to be a man's, but too big for a child's. They sank deep into the soft earth as if whoever, or whatever, had made them carried a significant weight. I followed them to where they disappeared at my back steps. The strange thing was, there were no footprints leading away. It was as if someone had walked up to my house and then simply ceased to exist. Probably just some local kid playing pranks on the new guy, I muttered to myself, trying to ignore the chill that crept up my spine despite the warm morning sun. I made a mental note to install motion-activated lights over the weekend and went about my day unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. That evening, I walked into town to grab dinner at the only diner in Pinewood Springs, a retro place called Betty's with checkered floors and vinyl booths that had probably been there since the 1950s. The bell above the door announced my arrival, and several pairs of eyes turned to assess the newcomer. I slid into a booth by the window and picked up a laminated menu. A middle-aged waitress with Doris on her name tag approached with a pot of coffee. "You must be the fella who bought the old Carlson place," she said, filling my mug without asking if I wanted any. Her tone was friendly enough, but there was something in her eyes. Caution, maybe, or pity. "Word travels fast," I replied, taking a sip of the surprisingly good coffee. Doris nodded. "Small town. Not much happens here that everyone doesn't know about by sundown." She lowered her voice slightly. "How are you settling in up there? Any visitors?" The way she emphasized that last word made me pause. "I did find some footprints in my yard this morning, leading from the woods to my back door." I tried to sound casual. "Local kids having some fun with the city slicker?" Doris's smile faltered. The coffee pot trembled slightly in her hand. What kind of footprints? Barefoot? Medium-sized? Why? She set the coffee pot down on the table with a thud that made me jump. Listen, honey, there's something you should know about that house. She glanced around the diner, then slid into the seat across from me. 5 years ago, the Carlson family, husband, wife, and their teenage daughter, they just vanished, left everything behind. Clothes in the closets, food in the fridge, car in the garage. I leaned forward, intrigued despite my skepticism. People don't just vanish. These folks did, Doris insisted. Sheriff found nothing. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. The only thing out of place was a set of barefoot prints leading from their back door into the woods. But here's the strange part. There were only 3 sets going in, and none coming out. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. So, what's the theory? They just walked into the forest and disappeared? Doris shrugged. Some say they ran off to start a new life. Others think it was something not natural. She lowered her voice to a whisper. Before the Carlsons, it was the Wheelers in '98, and the Morgans back in '87, all lived in that same house. All disappeared, leaving nothing but footprints into those woods. Come on, I said with a nervous laugh. That can't be true. Someone would have investigated. The house would have been condemned or something. Oh, there were investigations, all right, Doris said, standing up from the booth. Never found a thing. Your house has been bought and sold 4 times since the Carlsons. Nobody stays longer than a few months. Not after they start seeing the footprints. As I walked home that night, the story echoed in my mind. I told myself it was just small-town folklore, something to spook outsiders or explain away mundane disappearances. But I couldn't help scanning the tree line as I approached my house, looking for movement among the shadows. The motion-activated floodlights I'd installed that afternoon suddenly blazed to life as I approached, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I saw them. Fresh footprints crossing my front lawn, barefoot, like the ones from that morning. Only these were heading toward the house, not away from it. My heart hammered in my chest as I followed the trail with my eyes. The prints led directly to my front door, which I was certain I had locked before leaving for dinner. With trembling hands, I inserted my key and pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to find an intruder standing in my hallway. The house was silent and still. I hit the light switch and swept my gaze across the entryway, the living room, the kitchen. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Except for one thing. The back door stood ajar, swaying slightly in the evening breeze, and there, on my kitchen floor, was a single wet footprint, pointing toward the woods. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I checked every lock 3 times, drew all the curtains, and even pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door. The rational part of my brain insisted this was all an elaborate prank, maybe the town's way of hazing newcomers. But another part, a primal part I rarely acknowledged, whispered that something was very wrong in Pinewood Springs. In the morning light, my fears seemed foolish. The footprint in the kitchen had dried and nearly vanished, making me question if it had ever been there at all. I spent the day working from my laptop and trying to ignore the occasional creaks and groans of the old house settling around me. As evening approached, I decided to do some research on the property's history. The local library was a small brick building on Main Street with an elderly librarian who peered at me over cat-eye glasses when I asked about newspaper archives. Research for a book, I lied when she asked why I wanted information about the Carlson disappearance. Her skeptical expression told me she didn't believe me, but she led me to a microfiche machine in the back corner anyway. All our local papers are digitized now, she explained, showing me how to use the database. Except for the really old ones. Those are still on microfilm. She hesitated, then added, "If you're looking into the Carlson case, you might want to check the archives from 1954 too, and 1923. Why those years? I asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The pattern. Every 30 years or so, families go missing from that house. Always the same way. Footprints leading into the forest, nothing else disturbed." She left me with the haunting information. I spent hours scrolling through newspaper clippings, my unease growing with each article I found. The Carlsons in 2018. The Wheelers in 1992, not 98, as Doris had said. The Morgans in 1961. The Hendersons in 1930. And the first family, the original owners, the Blackwoods, in 1899. All vanished without a trace. The only clue, barefoot prints leading from their homes into the forest. Never any signs of struggle. Never any bodies found. Never any explanation. The most recent article included a quote from Sheriff Reynolds about the Carlson case. "We've exhausted all leads. At this point, we have to assume the family chose to leave. Though why they'd go into the forest without shoes or belongings remains a mystery." I was so absorbed in my reading that I didn't notice the library had emptied. The librarian touched my shoulder gently, making me jump. "We're closing now," she said. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I shook my head. "Not really. There's nothing that explains what happened to these families." She looked around nervously, then leaned closer. "There's something the papers don't mention. Something not many folks in town like to talk about." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her cardigan pocket and pressed it into my hand. "My grandmother worked here before me. She kept records of the old stories, the ones too strange for the official archives." The paper contained a hand-drawn map with a location marked deep in the forest behind my house. Below, it was written, "The Hollow Where They Walk." "What is this place?" I asked. The librarian was already walking away. "I've said too much. Just be careful, and whatever you do, if you hear them whispering your name from the trees, don't answer." The sun was setting as I walked home, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. The map burned in my pocket, and questions burned in my mind. What was the Hollow? Who were they? And why did 5 families from my house disappear into the forest over the span of 120 years? As I approached my property, I slowed my pace. Something was different. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. And there was a smell, earthy and ancient, like soil that had never seen sunlight. I stopped at my mailbox and looked toward the house. Fresh footprints crossed my lawn, dozens of them, all different sizes, all barefoot. They formed a chaotic pattern, as if multiple people had been dancing across my yard. And they all led to my front door. My hand shook as I reached for my phone to call the sheriff. That's when I heard it. A whisper so faint I almost mistook it for the rustling of leaves. "Daniel." My name, carried on the wind from the direction of the forest. Daniel Mitchell. I spun around, scanning the tree line. The forest stood dark and still, revealing nothing, but I could feel eyes on me, watching from shadows between the ancient trunks. "We've been waiting for you, Daniel." Yet the whispers came from everywhere and nowhere. Multiple voices overlapping, some high and childlike, others deep and resonant. They seemed to come from inside my own head, yet I knew they were real. I ran for the house, fumbling with my keys at the door. Once inside, I locked every entrance and drew the curtains tight. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to process what was happening. Had I imagined those voices? Was I letting Doris's stories and the librarian's warnings get to me? That night, sleep came in fitful bursts. Each time I drifted off, I jerked awake to what sounded like fingernails gently scratching at my windows. Tap, 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 like someone or something trying to get my attention. Round 3 in the morning, I woke to complete silence. The usual cricket symphonies and owl hoots had ceased, leaving an unnatural quiet that pressed against my ears. something had changed. Something was different. I slipped out of bed and moved to the window, parting the curtains just enough to peer outside. The full moon illuminated my backyard in silver light, making it almost as bright as day. And there, standing at the edge of the forest, was a figure. A woman. Or what looked like a woman. She stood perfectly still, her white nightgown billowing slightly, though there was no wind. Her face was obscured by a long dark hair, but I could feel her staring directly at me. Then, slowly, she raised her arm and beckoned to me with one pale finger. I let the curtain fall back into place, my heart thundering in my chest. When I gathered the courage to look again seconds later, she was gone. But where she had stood, a new set of footprints began, leading into the darkness between the trees. Morning brought no relief. The events of the night felt dreamlike in the harsh light of day, but the footprints remained, clear evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. They were still there, starting at the forest edge and disappearing into the trees. I called in sick to work and spent the morning pacing my house, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, abandon this house and its mysterious connection to the forest. But another part, the curious journalist who had moved to Pinewood Springs seeking inspiration for a book, wanted answers. By noon, I'd made my decision. I would follow the map to this place called The Hollow. Whatever secrets the forest held, I needed to know. If there was an explanation for the disappearances, for the footprints, for the whispers, I would find it. I packed a backpack with essentials: water, energy bars, a first aid kit, my phone, though reception was spotty at best, a flashlight, and a hunting knife I'd found in the garage. I also took the map and a compass. If I wasn't back by nightfall, I'd left a sealed envelope on my kitchen table addressed to Sheriff Reynolds with everything I'd learned so far. The forest welcomed me with dappled sunlight and birdsong. For the first mile or so, it seemed like any other woodland peaceful, even beautiful. The hiking trail was well maintained and clearly marked, suggesting regular use by locals. But as I ventured deeper, following the crude map, the atmosphere shifted. The trees grew older and wider, their canopies so dense that little sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The birdsong faded, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by my own footsteps and breathing. The trail gradually disappeared, forcing me to navigate using only the map and compass. The terrain became challenging. Fallen logs, dense underbrush, and unexpected drop-offs that required careful maneuvering. The air grew colder, too, despite it being a warm October day. After about 3 hours of hiking, I noticed something strange. The forest floor was becoming increasingly bare. Less underbrush, fewer fallen branches, as if the ground had been swept clean. And the trees, they were different here. Older, twisted into unnatural shapes, their bark blackened as if by ancient fires. Then I saw them. Footprints. Dozens, maybe hundreds, crisscrossing the forest floor. Barefoot prints of all sizes, some so old they were barely indentations in the soil, others fresh enough that I could see the outline of toes, all heading in the same direction. Deeper into the forest. My mouth went dry as I checked the map. I was close to the marked location. The hollow, just beyond a ridge ahead, if the map was accurate. As I crested the ridge, the trees suddenly thinned. I found myself looking down into a perfectly circular clearing about 50 yards across. In the center stood a single massive oak tree, its trunk wider than my car, its branches reaching out like gnarled fingers against the sky. The clearing was ringed by standing stones, crude monoliths that reminded me of a miniature Stonehenge. This was it. The hollow. I made my way down the slope carefully. The clearing was unnaturally silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, no distant bird calls. Just a heavy stillness that made it hard to breathe. The ground felt wrong beneath my feet, slightly springy, as if walking on flesh rather than soil. The footprints were everywhere here, creating a chaotic web across the clearing, all converging on the massive oak tree at the center. I approached it slowly, noticing that its bark was carved with symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and angular shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. And there were names. Hundreds of names carved into the trunk, some so weathered they were barely legible, others that looked freshly cut. I ran my fingers over them, recognizing some from my research. Carlson, Wheeler, Morgan, Henderson, Blackwood. Families who had vanished from my house over the centuries. Something compelled me to circle the tree. On the far side, I found a dark opening in the trunk, a hollow large enough for a person to enter. The air that wafted from it was cold and smelled of wet earth and decay. I shined my flashlight inside. The beam illuminated a narrow tunnel that seemed to descend into the ground beneath the tree. Roots formed a natural staircase leading downward into darkness. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing strangely in the hollow. "Is anyone there?" The answering whisper came from behind me, so close I could feel breath on my neck. "We're all here, Daniel." I spun around, nearly dropping my flashlight. The clearing was empty, but the whispers continued, seeming to come from the very air around me. "Join us, follow the footprints, come home." The voices overlapped. Men, women, children, all speaking together in a hypnotic cadence that made my thoughts fuzzy and unclear. I recognized one voice in particular, the woman I'd seen at the forest's edge the night before. "I've been waiting for you, Daniel. We all have. Since you moved into our house, my house, their house." The realization hit me like a physical blow. These were the voices of the vanished, the families who had disappeared from my house throughout the decades. "What happened to you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "Are you trapped here? Do you need help?" Laughter rippled through the clearing, not cruel but joyous, as if I'd said something wonderfully naive. "Trapped?" The voices seemed amused. "We are free, free from time, free from death, free from the world of pain and loss. We chose this," said the woman's voice distinctly, "just as you will choose." "Choose what?" I backed away from the tree, suddenly desperate to leave this place. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "To join us, to become part of the forest, part of the hollow. It's your time now, Daniel. Every 30 years the door opens, the house calls a new family, the forest welcomes them home." I turned to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Looking down, I saw with horror that roots had emerged from the soil, wrapping around my ankles in a gentle but unbreakable grip. More roots slithered from the ground like serpents, reaching for my legs, my waist, my arms. "No!" I shouted, struggling against the living bonds. "I don't choose this. I want to leave." The woman's voice again, soothing now. "You already chose, Daniel, the moment you followed the footprints, the moment you entered our home, the moment you heard our call." The massive oak seemed to shift and groan. The hollow in its trunk widened, darkness spilling out like liquid shadow. And in that darkness, I began to see faces, pale, translucent faces with eyes that glowed with an internal light. The missing families. Generations of them, all watching me with expectant smiles. "Join us, Daniel. Be part of our family forever." The roots pulled me inexorably toward the hollow. I fought with everything I had, clawing at the ground, cutting at the roots with my knife. But for every root I severed, 3 more emerged to take its place. As twilight descended on the hollow, the last thing I saw before being dragged into the darkness was my own footprints in the soil, leading from the ridge to the tree. Footprints that would soon vanish, just like those who had come before me. Sheriff Mike Reynolds wasn't surprised to find the Mitchell house empty when he arrived 3 days later. The envelope on the kitchen table contained exactly what he expected. wild theories about the forest, the previous disappearances, and something called the Hollow. He'd seen it all before. 5 times in his 30-year career as sheriff of Pinewood Springs. "Another one gone," he said to Deputy Garcia as they walked through the silent house. Everything was in its place. Clothes in the closet, laptop on the desk, car in the garage. The only sign of disturbance was the back door, standing wide open as if someone had left in a hurry. "Should we organize a search party?" Garcia asked, looking nervously toward the forest visible through the kitchen window. Reynolds shook his head. "Wouldn't do any good. We'll file the report, same as the others. Missing person, presumed voluntary departure." "But sir, the footprints—" "I don't want to hear about any damn footprints, Garcia," Reynolds snapped. He'd spent too many years trying to explain the unexplainable, too many sleepless nights wondering what really happened in those woods. "Just the facts for the report. Mitchell's been missing 3 days. No signs of struggle. Personal belongings left behind." As they prepared to leave, Reynolds paused in the doorway. "Lock it up and put the for sale sign back in the yard. Someone new will buy it eventually. They always do." Garcia hesitated. "Sir, maybe we should tell people about the pattern. Warn the next owners." Reynolds laughed bitterly. "Tell them what? That every 30 years people vanish from this house without a trace? That there's something in those woods that calls to them? Who would believe that?" He shook his head. "Besides, it'll be someone else's problem by then. I'll be long retired." They drove away as evening shadows lengthened across the lawn. Neither of them noticed the fresh barefoot prints that appeared at the forest's edge as twilight descended. A man's prints heading toward the house. In the woods, the whispers continued. And among them was a new voice, still learning the ancient songs of the Hollow, still adapting to the endless twilight of the forest. My voice. From the edge of the trees, I watched the house that was briefly mine. I see the for sale sign going up again. I know that someone will come, a family perhaps, looking for a quiet life in a small town. A good deal on a house that no one seems to want for long. And when they arrive, I'll be waiting. I'll leave footprints for them to follow. I'll whisper their names in the night. I'll invite them to join our family in the Hollow, because that's how it works in Pinewood Springs. Every 30 years, the cycle continues. The forest grows stronger. Our family expands. And somewhere in the roots of an ancient oak, in a place beyond time and death, we wait together. So check your yard for footprints in the morning. Listen carefully for whispers on the wind. And if you're ever in the market for a bargain home in a quiet town called Pinewood Springs, maybe think twice, because we're always looking for new family members. And once you hear us calling, once you see our footprints, once you feel the pull of the Hollow, it's already too late. Now, I have a question for you. Have you checked for footprints outside your window lately? Are you sure those creaks in your home are just the house settling? Perhaps you should listen more carefully tonight. You might just hear us whispering your name. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your theories about what really happened in the Hollow. Have you ever felt drawn to a place you couldn't explain? Have you ever found mysterious footprints that seem to appear out of nowhere? Share your experiences below, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another story that might just keep you up at night, wondering what's waiting in the shadows. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep at all. Story number 2. Have you ever had that feeling, that inexplicable sense that something isn't quite right? That prickle on the back of your neck when you're alone in your home late at night? I never used to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. I was that skeptical friend who always had a logical explanation for everything, until I spent one night in the abandoned Victorian house next door to mine. What I experienced there changed me forever, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. If you've ever doubted whether there's more to our reality than what we can see and touch, this story might make you think twice. So dim your lights, get comfortable, and join me as I recount the most terrifying night of my life. If you make it to the end, let me know in the comments if you'd have done anything differently, or if you've ever had an experience you simply couldn't explain. The story begins now. It was mid-October in Salem, Massachusetts. Not the famous witch trial Salem, but a small suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, that just happened to share the same name. Our little Salem was known for exactly nothing, except for the abandoned Victorian house at the end of Maple Street. I just moved into the Blue Craftsman next door about 3 months ago. The realtor had mentioned the vacant property in passing, calling it a fixer-upper opportunity with historical charm. What she failed to mention was that no one in town would go near it after dark. It wasn't until the Halloween party at my coworker Dave's place that I heard the full story. Or, at least, what people claimed was the story. "Wait, you bought the house next to the Richardson place?" Dave's wife, Melissa, exclaimed when I mentioned my address. "Aren't you scared living there?" I laughed and took a sip of my pumpkin beer. "Of what? Bad property values?" "The Richardson family disappeared one night in 1997, Dave explained, lowering his voice dramatically. "Mom, Dad, teenage daughter, gone without a trace. Car still in the garage. Dinner still on the table. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Police investigation turned up nothing," added Melissa. "It was like they just vanished into thin air." I rolled my eyes. "So, it's one of those urban legends every small town has." "The last couple claimed they heard children laughing in the middle of the night," Melissa said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But the Richardsons only had one daughter." Maybe it was the 3 pumpkin beers I'd had, or maybe it was my natural stubbornness when faced with superstition, but I heard myself say, "Fine, I'll go in there tomorrow night. I'll even stay a few hours. Live stream the whole thing so you can all see there's nothing supernatural going on." The next day, I immediately regretted my drunken bravado. But Dave had already created a group chat called Ghost Hunter Extraordinaire, with about 15 people from the party, all excited to watch my live stream adventure. At 9:30 p.m., I began gathering supplies. Flashlight, portable phone charger, water bottle, granola bar, small first aid kit, for practical concerns like rusty nails, not ghosts. I started the live stream at exactly 10 p.m., angling my phone camera to show both my face and the house behind me. "Hey everyone. So, I'm actually doing this stupid thing I promised while drunk last night." My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet night. "I'm going to enter the allegedly haunted Richardson house and stay there until 2 a.m. to prove once and for all that it's just an abandoned building with a creepy backstory, not some supernatural hotspot." As I approached the back door, my flashlight beam bouncing eerily off the grimy windows, I could see the chat going crazy on my screen. People sending ghost emojis, telling me to turn back, asking me to check specific rooms. I was genuinely surprised when the tarnished brass knob turned easily in my hand. The door swung inward with a long, dramatic creak that couldn't have been more perfect if this had been a movie set. "Well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I aimed my flashlight into the darkness beyond. "Looks like I'm going in after all." I stepped over the threshold, and immediately the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I told myself it was just because the house had no heating and had been closed up for years. "I'm inside the Richardson house," I narrated, panning my phone around slowly to show my surroundings. I was in what appeared to be a mudroom that led to the kitchen. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. As I shined my flashlight around, something caught my eye on the refrigerator, colorful magnets holding up children's drawings and what looked like school schedules. "I thought they only had one daughter," I murmured, moving closer to examine the papers. Then I heard it, a soft thump from somewhere upstairs, like the sound of a footstep on carpet. I froze, pointing my flashlight toward the ceiling, "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered, feeling my heart rate accelerate. "I'm sure it's just the house settling or maybe a raccoon that got in somehow." As I turned toward the hallway, the beam of my flashlight swept across the kitchen window, and for just a split second I thought I saw a face looking in at me from outside. A pale, small face with dark eyes. I whipped the light back, but there was nothing there. "Okay, that was creepy," I admitted, my voice slightly higher than normal. "Just a reflection, though." But as I moved toward the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore, and that whatever was with me wasn't friendly. The living room of the Richardson house was like stepping into a time capsule. Floral-patterned couches with plastic covers, a boxy television set that probably weighed 100 pounds, faded family photos on the walls, their faces barely visible in my flashlight beam. As I panned my phone camera around the room, I noticed something odd. There were indentations in the carpet. 4 small circles, evenly spaced, like something had been moved. A piece of furniture, perhaps, that had stood in the same spot for years. The chat was going wild with theories. Maybe they found something underneath it. Or they were hiding something. I chuckled. I don't think the spirits mind a little disturbance after 25 years of solitude. The words had barely left my mouth when I heard it again. That soft thump from upstairs, followed this time by what sounded like something being dragged across the floor. I stood up quickly, pointing my flashlight toward the ceiling. Okay, that was definitely something. "I guess I should check upstairs," I said, not bothering to hide the reluctance in my voice. That's where all the action seems to be happening. I moved toward the staircase in the front hall, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. The wooden steps looked solid enough, but I tested each one carefully before putting my full weight on it. As I ascended, the temperature seemed to drop even further. My breath was now visible as a thin cloud in the beam of my flashlight. "It's getting really cold in here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now, like unnaturally cold. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before me, with closed doors on either side. Classic horror movie scenario. "All right, let's see what's behind door number 1, I said, approaching the first door on my right. I turned the knob and pushed it open slowly, wincing at the creak of the hinges. It was a bathroom. Pastel pink tiles and matching fixtures. Nothing extraordinary. I backed out and moved to the next door. This one opened to reveal what was clearly the master bedroom, a king-sized bed still made with a floral comforter. His and hers nightstands. Matching lamps. As I turned to leave the room, my flashlight caught something on the bed. A slight depression in the middle of the comforter, as if someone had recently sat there. A chill ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the cold temperature. The chat was going crazy. Get out, check under the bed. Can anyone else hear that whispering in the background? I froze. Whispering? I don't hear any whispering. I stood completely still, straining my ears, and then, there it was. So faint I almost missed it. A soft murmuring sound, like multiple voices having a hushed conversation. It seemed to be coming from the next room down the hall. The next room had a sign on it, hand-painted wooden letters spelling out Lily's room, with small flowers dotting the eyes. This must be the daughter's bedroom, I said, reaching for the doorknob. It felt ice cold to the touch, much colder than anything else in the house so far. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The whispering stopped immediately. Lily's bedroom was exactly what you'd expect from a teenage girl in the 90s. Posters of boy bands on the walls. A collection of Beanie Babies arranged on the bed. A desk with school textbooks still open. A half-written essay visible on notebook paper. I moved toward the desk, curious about what Lily had been writing about before she disappeared. As I got closer, I could make out the title at the top of the page. The History of Our House, Research Project for Mr. Abernathy's Class. Wait a minute, I said, leaning closer. Abernathy, That's my neighbor's name. I began to read aloud from the essay. The Victorian house at 1502 Maple Street was built in 1887 by Thomas Preston, a local banker. Preston lived there with his wife and 3 children until 1895, when tragedy struck the family. According to newspaper accounts from the time, all 3 children fell ill with a mysterious fever and died within days of each other. Mrs. Preston, overcome with grief, took her own life the following month. My parents don't believe in ghosts, but sometimes I hear children laughing in the middle of the night. I've told Mom and Dad, but they say it's just my imagination or dreams. But I know what I hear. And sometimes I see them too. 3 children, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, playing in my room when everyone else is asleep. I've tried to talk to them, but they never answer me. They just stare with their dark eyes and... The essay ended there, mid-sentence. Okay, that's unsettling, I said, my voice barely audible now. The chat was exploding with messages, but I couldn't focus on them. Because as I stood there, staring at Lily's unfinished homework, the temperature in the room plummeted so suddenly that I gasped. My breath clouded heavily in front of me, and the edges of the paper on the desk began to curl with frost. And then I heard it, not whispering this time, but laughing. The high-pitched, innocent laughter of children coming from right behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But there was no one there. Just the empty bedroom with its faded 90s decor. The laughter faded, replaced by that soft whispering again. Except now, I could almost make out words in the hushed voices. She can see us, like Lily could. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny." The only response was more whispering. And then, distinctly, "Stay with us." I backed toward the door, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. "I think I've seen enough of the upstairs," I said, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. As I turned to leave Lily's room, movement caught my eye. One of the Beanie Babies on the bed slowly toppled over, as if pushed by an invisible hand. I practically ran into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But as I started back toward the stairs, I realized something that made my blood run cold. All the doors in the hallway were now open, every single one, and I was certain I'd only opened 2 of them. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, staring at the row of open doors. Did one of you see me open all these doors?" I asked the livestream viewers, already knowing the answer. The chat confirmed what I feared. "No, you only opened 2. They're playing with you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Okay, so either I'm losing my mind or... I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence, because saying it out loud, that I might actually be experiencing something supernatural, felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. As I put my foot on the first step, I heard a door slam shut behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, to see that all the doors were now closed again. I practically flew down the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste to get back to the first floor. When I reached the bottom, I leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I moved past the living room toward what appeared to be a home office. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open carefully. Inside was a cluttered desk with an ancient desktop computer, one of those beige monstrosities with a massive CRT monitor. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes and 3-ring binders. Most seemed to be ordinary household bills and correspondence, but one document caught my eye. A letter from the local historical society dated October 15th, 1997, just days before the family vanished. I picked it up and read aloud. "Dear Mr. Richardson, thank you for your inquiry regarding the history of your property at 1502 Maple Street. We have compiled the information you requested, though I must admit that some of the historical accounts make for rather disturbing reading. As you suspected, there have been an unusual number of disappearances associated with the property over the years. After the Preston tragedy in 1895, the house remained vacant until 1903, when the Miller family moved in. They disappeared without explanation in 1911, leaving all their possessions behind, much like the Prestons before them. The pattern repeated with the Johnson family, 1912 to 1927, the Crawfords, 1928 to 1942, and the Bennetts, 1943 to 1967. In each case, the disappearances were preceded by reports of unusual phenomena, particularly the sound of children laughing and playing at night. Your daughter's experiences, as you described them in your letter, are remarkably similar to accounts from previous families. I strongly suggest you consider the possibility that the letter ended there, the rest of the page missing. But, as I stood there, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small door under the stairs, partially hidden by the angle of the staircase. I think that might be a basement door, I said, pointing my flashlight toward it. The chat immediately exploded. Don't go down there. Basement =, death and horror movies. I reached for the doorknob, but before my fingers could touch it, the door swung open on its own, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. I jumped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. Okay, that was definitely not the wind. From the darkness below came the sound of childish laughter, echoing up the stairs. "Who's down there?" I called, trying to sound authoritative despite the tremor in my voice. "This isn't funny anymore." The laughter faded, replaced by a single voice, a child's voice singing a nursery rhyme I didn't recognize. The melody was haunting, drifting up from the basement like a memory from someone else's childhood. "I'm going down," I announced, positioning my flashlight in front of me like a weapon. "But I'm staying near the stairs. Quick in, quick look around, quick out." I took the first step down, and the old wood creaked loudly beneath my weight. The singing stopped immediately. I continued down the stairs, testing each step before trusting it with my full weight. The beam of my flashlight revealed a typical unfinished basement concrete floor, stone foundation walls, exposed pipes and beams overhead. But what wasn't typical were the drawings covering every available surface of the walls. Childish, crayon drawings of stick figures playing together. 3 small figures and 1 larger one, in endless variations across the concrete. The larger figure in the drawings had long hair, just like Lily Richardson, and scattered among the drawings were the words, repeated over and over in different colors and handwriting styles. "Stay with us, Lily." As I stood there, staring at the disturbing gallery of children's art, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. The creaking of the stairs behind me, as if someone was coming down. I whirled around, pointing my flashlight at the staircase. There was no one there. But the creaking continued, step by step, invisible feet making their way down toward me. And then I felt it. A cold, small hand slipping into mine. I looked down in horror, but there was nothing there. Nothing I could see, at least. Yet, I could feel tiny, ice-cold fingers wrapping around my own. I tried to pull away, but the invisible grip tightened painfully. "Let go," I gasped, genuine fear coursing through me now. "Please, let go." The grip released suddenly, and I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. For a split second, just a fraction of a moment, I thought I saw them, 3 small figures standing at the bottom of the stairs. Children in old-fashioned clothes, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes dark and empty. And then they were gone, like a glitch in reality that fixed itself almost instantly. "I'm done," I said, backing toward the stairs. I'm getting out of here." But as I turned to climb the stairs, I found my way blocked, not by a physical barrier, but by a wall of cold air so intense it felt solid. I pushed against it, but it was like trying to move through ice. "Let me go," I shouted, panic rising in my throat. "I don't want to stay with you." The moment the words left my mouth, the invisible barrier vanished. I nearly fell forward, catching myself on the railing at the last second. I didn't hesitate. I ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. When I reached the top, I slammed the basement door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard. But as I passed the living room, I heard a new sound that stopped me in my tracks. A woman's voice, soft and sad, coming from inside the room. "Please help them." Slowly, reluctantly, I turned and pointed my flashlight into the living room. There, sitting on the plastic-covered couch, was a woman. She was faintly transparent, like an image projected on smoke, but I could make out her features clearly enough, the same woman from the family photos. Mrs. Richardson. "Please," she said again, her voice sounding distant, as if coming from the bottom of a well. "Help them move on. They won't let us leave." "Who took you?" I finally managed to ask, though my voice was barely a whisper. "The children," she replied, her image growing fainter. "The Preston children. They've been alone so long. They just wanted someone to play with, but they don't understand that we can't stay, that we need to move on." "What do you want me to do?" I asked, though every instinct was screaming at me to run. "Find what keeps them here," she said, her form now barely visible. "Help them. Find peace." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the living room with my racing thoughts and pounding heart. I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Mrs. Richardson had asked me to help the children find peace, to help everyone trapped in this house move on. "Okay," I said, both to myself and to my viewers. "I need to find what's keeping the Preston children here. Something must be binding them to this place." I moved toward the hallway again, looking more carefully at the family photos on the walls. In one of them, a shot of the Richardson family standing in front of their house. I noticed something in the background. On the second floor, in one of the windows, there were what looked like 3 small faces peering out. In the formal dining room, I found a small china cabinet filled with antique dolls and toys. "These look old enough to be from the Victorian era," I said, examining them through the glass. "Maybe one of these belongs to the Preston children." I tried the cabinet door, but it was locked. As if in response, I heard a soft metallic clink on the hardwood floor behind me. I turned to see a small brass key lying on the ground. "That wasn't there before," I said, my mouth going dry. The key fit perfectly, and the lock turned with a satisfying click. I pulled the cabinet door open and carefully examined the contents. Porcelain dolls with cracked faces, wooden trains with peeling paint, a teddy bear missing one eye. As I spoke, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. My breath fogged in front of me, and frost began to form on the glass shelves of the cabinet. And then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw them. 3 children standing behind me. 2 boys and a girl, all under 10 years old, dressed in late 19th century clothing. Their faces were pale and solemn, their eyes dark and hollow. The smallest child, a boy no older than 5, raised his hand and pointed at something in the cabinet, a small wooden music box pushed to the back of the bottom shelf. Slowly, my hands trembling, I reached in and carefully pulled out the music box. It was intricately carved with flowers and birds, the wood dark with age but still beautiful. I carefully lifted the lid. Inside was a velvet lining, faded to a dull burgundy, and a small winding mechanism. As soon as the lid was fully open, the mechanism began to turn on its own, playing a haunting melody, the same tune I'd heard being sung in the basement. "This is what keeps you here?" I asked. "This music box?" The oldest child, the girl, spoke. Her voice was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Mother gave it to us before we got sick. She said as long as the music played, we would never be alone." "And after you died?" I asked gently. "We couldn't find it," said the middle child, a boy of about 8. "It was lost until the new family came." "The Richardsons?" The children nodded. "The girl found it," said the little one. "Lily. She wound it up. She set us free, but you didn't want to be alone again," I finished for him, understanding dawning. "So you kept her here, and when her parents tried to help her—" "We kept them too," said the girl, her voice breaking with what sounded like remorse. "We just wanted friends. We've been alone for so long." I looked down at the music box, still playing its melancholy tune. "And now? Do you want to stay here forever? Or do you want to move on?" "We're tired," the oldest finally said. "So tired, but we're scared of what comes next." "I think your mother is waiting for you," I said, not knowing why I said it, but feeling it was true. I think she's been waiting a very long time. I closed the lid of the music box, silencing the melody mid-note. Then, following an instinct I couldn't explain, I took the key from the cabinet and inserted it into a small keyhole in the back of the box that I hadn't noticed before. "Are you ready?" I asked the children. They moved closer together, holding hands. "We're ready," said the oldest. I turned the key. There was a soft click, and the winding mechanism inside the box made a whirring sound as it unwound completely. The spring had been released. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature in the room began to rise, the frost on the cabinet melting away. The children's forms grew more transparent, fading like morning mist under the sun. "Thank you," whispered the oldest, her voice growing fainter. "Now they can leave too." And then they were gone. In the silence that followed, I became aware of other presences in the room. I turned slowly to see 3 adults standing in the doorway, Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, and between them, a teenage girl I recognized from the photos as Lily. "You freed them," said Mrs. Richardson, smiling. "And now you've freed us too." "I don't understand," I said. "How were you connected to the music box?" "The children's spirits were bound to it," Mr. Richardson explained, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "And once they took Lily, we became bound to them, a chain of trapped souls." "But you broke the chain," Lily said, smiling at me. Her form was already beginning to fade. "We can all move on now." "Will you be okay?" I asked, feeling strange about asking ghosts if they'd be all right. They nodded, their forms growing increasingly transparent. "Thank you," Mrs. Richardson said as they faded from view. "Tell our story." And then they were gone too, leaving me alone in the dining room with the broken music box and a profound sense of peace that seemed to permeate the entire house. At 2 a.m. exactly, I walked out the front door, carrying the music box with me. I wasn't sure why I took it, perhaps as proof of what I'd experienced, or maybe because it seemed wrong to leave it behind. As I stepped onto the front porch, I looked back over my shoulder at the dark house. For just a moment, I thought I saw faces in the upstairs windows. Not the solemn, hollow-eyed children from before, but smiling faces. The Preston children with a woman who must have been their mother. The Richardson family, together again. "Well," I said, turning to face my phone camera one last time, "I came here to prove the Richardson house wasn't haunted. I was wrong, but I don't think it's haunted anymore." I walked across the yard toward my own house, feeling exhausted, but strangely at peace. "I don't know if any of you will believe what happened tonight," I said to my viewers. "I'm not sure I believe it myself, but I know what I experienced, and I'll never look at the world the same way again. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments what you would have done in my situation. Would you have run at the first sign of ghostly children? Or would you have stayed to help like I did? And more importantly, do you believe in ghosts now? Because after tonight, I certainly do. If you've ever had an unexplainable experience, share it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this true story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next video. There are more strange tales to tell. And I'm just getting started. Sleep well tonight, friends. And maybe check your closets before you turn out their lights. Story number 3. Hey there, fellow night owls. Before I begin tonight's story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt that creeping sensation that you're not alone, even when you know you should be? That prickle on the back of your neck when you're home by yourself? If you've experienced that, then maybe you'll understand what I'm about to share. And if this story resonates with you, if it brings back memories of your own encounters, drop a comment below. I read every single one, and sometimes knowing we're not alone in our experiences is the only comfort we have. If you're new here, welcome to our growing community of nighttime storytellers. Hit subscribe and that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Trust me, after tonight's story, you'll want to stay connected, for safety's sake. Now, dim your lights, get comfortable, and let me tell you about how I thought I was safe until I met the Shadow Man. The story begins now. I never believed in the supernatural. I was always the skeptic, the rational one, the person who rolled their eyes when friends talked about ghostly encounters. That changed last October when I moved into the old Victorian on Maple Street in the small town of Oak Ridge, Pennsylvania. My name is Jamie Sullivan, and until 6 months ago I was a financial analyst in Philadelphia. Burnout hit me hard after 7 years of 60-hour work weeks, so when my great-aunt Meredith passed away and left me her house in Oak Ridge, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. The house was beautiful in that classic, slightly weathered way. 3 stories with a wraparound porch, intricate woodwork, and tall windows that let in slices of golden light during the day. It sat at the end of Maple Street, partially hidden by 2 massive oak trees. "It's a lot of house for one person," the real estate agent had commented when she handed me the keys. Her name was Deborah, a local who'd known my aunt. Meredith was quite the character. "Lived here alone for almost 40 years after your uncle passed." "I'll manage," I told her confidently. "I'm looking forward to the quiet." Deborah's smile faltered slightly. "Well, if you need anything, the neighbors are friendly. And don't hesitate to call if—" She paused. "If the house feels like too much." I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say, but I didn't dwell on it. The first few weeks were perfect. I settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings with coffee on the porch watching the autumn leaves cascade from the oaks. Afternoons exploring the town or working on my laptop. Evenings reading by the fireplace. Then, as October deepened and the nights grew longer, I began to notice things. It started small. A book I was certain I'd left on the coffee table appeared on the desk in the study. Keys that should have been hanging by the door were instead on the kitchen counter. The thermostat that I set to 68 degrees at night would somehow be at 62 by morning. Old house quirks, I told myself. Maybe drafts were causing things to move. But then came the sounds. The first time I heard it, I was drifting off to sleep. A soft shuffling, like slippered feet moving slowly across hardwood floors. It came from the hallway outside my bedroom. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" Silence. I grabbed my phone, turning on its flashlight, and cautiously opened my bedroom door. The hallway was empty. I checked every room on the second floor, then nervously descended to the first floor. Nothing was disturbed. The doors were locked, windows secured. The next day I mentioned it to Maggie, the barista at Oak Brew Coffee who'd become something of a friend. "The old Sullivan place, huh?" she said, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "You know, there've always been stories about that house." "Stories?" I asked, suddenly more interested than I wanted to admit. Maggie shrugged. "Oh, you know how small towns are. Every old house has a ghost story." She handed me my drink with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How's the novel coming along?" She'd changed the subject deliberately, I was sure of it. That night, I heard the shuffling again. But this time, it wasn't just in the hallway. It moved down the stairs. Slow, methodical steps. One, then another, then another. I froze in my bed, barely breathing, listening as whatever it was reached the bottom stair, that one that always creaked no matter how carefully you stepped. And sure enough, creak. Then silence. For several minutes, nothing. Just as my hammering heart began to slow, thinking it was over, I heard something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. A door opened downstairs. The distinct sound of the hinges on the basement door. The basement, the one place in the house I avoided. It was unfinished, with rough stone walls and a dirt floor in some areas. I'd gone down once when I first moved in and decided the space wasn't worth renovating. Something about it felt unwelcoming. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, just lay awake, listening, my body rigid under the covers. 3. That's how many dots I counted right before I fell asleep that night. 3 dark spots on the ceiling that I hadn't noticed before, like shadows, but without anything to cast them. I blinked, and they were gone. If only I had known then what those 3 shadows meant. If only I had packed my bags and left that very night. It was exactly 1 week later when I actually saw him for the first time. I'd been working late in the study, the only light coming from my laptop screen and a small desk lamp. The wind had picked up outside, sending occasional gusts that caused the old windows to rattle in their frames. At around 1 a.m., I got up to make some tea. As I passed the staircase, a movement caught my eye, just a slight shifting of shadows near the top of the stairs. I stopped, squinting into the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. But then, something did respond. Not with words, but with movement. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, seemed to solidify at the top of the stairs. It had the general shape of a man, tall, with broad shoulders, but no discernible features. Just a black silhouette against the slightly less black background. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. Then it moved. 1 step down. Slow, deliberate. That broke my paralysis. I fumbled for the light switch, flooding the staircase with light. Nothing was there. I didn't sleep in the house that night. I drove to the only motel in Oak Ridge, a rundown place called the Pine Rest. The next morning, I felt ridiculous. Ghost stories and shadow men belonged in the novels I was trying to write, not in my actual life. I drove back to the house, determined to approach the situation logically. I decided to be proactive. I called an electrician to check all the wiring, thinking power fluctuations might be causing strange lighting effects. I scheduled a cleaning service. I even joined a weekly writing group at the local library, making sure I wasn't spending too much time alone. For a few days, this approach seemed to work. The house felt normal again. Then came the rainy Tuesday when everything escalated. It had been pouring all day, one of those constant heavy October rains. I'd been writing in the study when the power went out. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but the battery was nearly dead. With just 5% battery left, I located a flashlight in the kitchen drawer and some candles. As I lit the 3rd candle on the coffee table, I felt it. A drop in temperature so sudden it made me gasp. The living room went from comfortably cool to freezing in seconds. I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. "Just a draft," I said aloud, my voice sounding thin and unconvincing. But there was no open window, no door ajar. Then I heard it, that shuffling sound again, but not from upstairs this time. It was coming from right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, landing on nothing but the cold. The cold was concentrated, like standing in front of an open freezer, and it was moving, circling me slowly. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "This isn't funny." The shuffling stopped. The circle of cold stopped. Everything went completely still. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then, directly in front of me, no more than 5 feet away, he materialized. the Shadow Man. More solid than before. Still featureless, still just a silhouette, but undeniably there. And tall. Taller than seemed possible. His head nearly touching the 10-foot ceiling. The candle flames all bent toward him, as if he was drawing the very light into himself. I backed away slowly until I hit the wall. There was nowhere else to go. The Shadow Man took one step forward, then another. In desperation, I threw the flashlight at him. Threw him. It passed right through the black silhouette and clattered against the far wall. The sound seemed to startle him. The figure paused, then dissolved, like ink dispersing in water. The power came back on seconds later, the sudden brightness momentarily blinding me. The next day, I drove to the town library, determined to research the history of my house. The librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Peterson, seemed unsurprised by my interest. "The Sullivan House," she said, nodding. "Quite a few people have come in asking about that property over the years." She helped me access the town's digital archives. What I found sent chills down my spine. The house had been built in 1897 by a wealthy industrialist named Victor Blackwood, who died under mysterious circumstances just 3 years after its completion. The newspaper simply stated he was found deceased in the basement of his home, cause undetermined. After his death, the house changed hands frequently, with no family staying longer than 5 years. There were 3 more documented deaths in the house over the decades, all in the basement, all ruled accidental or of natural causes. My great-uncle had purchased the property in 1975, and after his death in 1983, my great-aunt Meredith had lived there alone until her passing earlier this year. According to her neighbors quoted in her obituary, Meredith had become increasingly reclusive in her final years. As I scrolled through the articles, one detail jumped out at me, a quote from my great-aunt in a community newsletter from 2010. "I'm never truly alone in this house." Some might find that frightening, but I've made my peace with it. Mrs. Peterson watched me carefully as I finished reading. "Finding what you're looking for?" I looked up at her. "Did you know my Aunt Meredith?" She nodded. Everyone knew Meredith. Brilliant woman. Bit eccentric, especially toward the end. "Did she ever mention seeing things in the house?" Mrs. Peterson's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. "You should talk to Edward Morgan. He was your aunt's doctor. His office is just down the street from that coffee shop you frequent." As I gathered my things, Mrs. Peterson added, almost casually, "If I were you, I'd pay special attention to the history of that basement." That night, as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about what Mrs. Peterson had said. What was down there that was so important? As if in response to my thoughts, I heard that now familiar shuffling. But this time, it started in the basement. Slowly, methodically, it made its way up the basement stairs, then through the first floor, then up the main staircase, closer and closer to my bedroom. 1, 2, 3 sounds of footsteps, then silence. I held my breath. The temperature in my room plummeted. The doorknob turned slowly. I closed my eyes, too terrified to watch as my bedroom door creaked open. Morning came somehow. I must have fallen asleep eventually, though I had no memory of doing so. My bedroom door was closed, the house quiet and sun-filled, as if nothing had happened. I made an appointment with Dr. Morgan for that afternoon. Whether this was a haunting or a mental health crisis, I needed professional input. Edward Morgan was older than I expected, well into his 70s with a full head of silver hair. Today, his expression was serious as he gestured for me to sit. "Jamie Sullivan," he said. "Meredith's great-niece. I've been expecting you." That caught me off guard. "You have?" He nodded. "Mrs. Peterson from the library called me. Said you were researching the history of your house." "I've been experiencing things I can't explain. I thought perhaps it could be a medical issue." Hallucinations, maybe. Dr. Morgan studied me for a long moment. Tell me what you've been experiencing. Leave nothing out. For the next 20 minutes, I recounted everything. The moved objects, the temperature drops, the footsteps, and finally, the shadow man. Throughout my story, Dr. Morgan listened intently. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Medically, there are several conditions that could cause hallucinations. Carbon monoxide poisoning, certain medications, sleep deprivation, extreme stress. Have you checked your home for gas leaks? Yes, I had the utility company out last week. Everything was normal. Dr. Morgan nodded, then did something unexpected. He reached into his desk drawer and removed an old-fashioned key, which he placed on the desk between us. "What's that?" I asked. "The key to your basement storage room," he said quietly. "Meredith gave it to me for safekeeping years ago." I stared at the key. I didn't know there was a storage room. It's behind the old coal chute. The entrance is obscured by shelving. Deliberately so. My mouth went dry. Why would she hide a room? Dr. Morgan's eyes met mine. Because of what's in it, evidence. He hesitated. "Jamie, I've been the town doctor for 45 years. In that time, 8 different families have lived in your house. 7 of them came to me with nearly identical complaints to yours." A chill ran through me. What happened to them? Most left. A few stayed and learned to live with it, like your aunt. He paused. One tried to destroy whatever is in that house and ended up destroying himself instead. "Are you saying my house is actually haunted? That I'm not crazy?" "I'm a man of science, Jamie. I don't use terms like haunted, but I do believe there are phenomena we don't yet understand." He pushed the key toward me. "What's in that room might help you make sense of what's happening. What exactly will I find there? Research, decades of it. Your aunt wasn't just a recluse. She was an investigator. After your uncle died, she dedicated herself to understanding what was in that house." His expression darkened. "She had a theory that this presence feeds on fear. The more afraid you are, the stronger it becomes." "Then why didn't she leave?" I asked. "Meredith was stubborn and childless. I think she stayed to protect future families, to find a solution." Dr. Morgan looked tired suddenly. "In her final days, she told me she'd found a way to contain it." I wrapped my fingers around the key. "Thank you for this." He wrote something on a prescription pad and slid it toward me. It contained an address and phone number. This is someone who helped Meredith with her research. Someone with specialized knowledge. As I stood to leave, Dr. Morgan added, "Whatever you decide to do, Jamie, remember, fear gives it power. If you can master your fear, you might stand a chance." That evening, I stood at the top of the basement stairs, key in hand, flashlight in the other. Logic told me to wait until morning, but something deeper told me that time was running out. At the far corner of the basement, just as Dr. Morgan had described, was a set of metal shelves positioned at an odd angle. I pulled them aside with effort, revealing a narrow door set into the stone wall. It looked older than the house itself, made of dark wood with iron banding. Beyond the door was a small room lined with bookshelves crammed with notebooks, old library books, and file folders. A small desk occupied one wall, its surface neat and organized, with a leather-bound journal placed precisely in the center. The journal was dated just 3 months before my aunt's death. The first entry read, "After 40 years of study, I believe I finally understand what we're dealing with. Not a ghost, not a demon, but something older. The indigenous people who lived on this land long before the house was built had a name for it, the Devourer of Peace. The settlers called it the Shadow Man. It cannot harm physically. At least it has never done so directly. Its power lies in terror, in the slow erosion of sanity through fear. It feeds on this fear, growing stronger with each quickened heartbeat, each panicked breath. I have found a way to contain it, not destroy it, I don't believe that's possible, but to bind it to one place where it can do no harm. The ritual requires sacrifice, but not of blood, of fear itself. One must face it, acknowledge it, and then surrender fear completely. The rest of the entry contained detailed instructions for a ritual involving specific candles, symbols drawn in salt, and a chant in a language I didn't recognize. I was so engrossed in reading that I didn't notice the temperature dropping until my breath began to cloud in front of me. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, and then went out completely. In the sudden darkness, I heard it, that shuffling sound, now inside the small room with me, close, too close. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam caught him standing between me and the door. The shadow man, more solid than I'd ever seen him. Though still featureless, I could now make out the suggestion of a face. Deep hollows where eyes should be, a slash of darkness for a mouth. "What do you want?" I whispered. The figure tilted its head, an unnervingly human gesture. Then it raised one arm, pointing directly at my heart. It wanted my fear, just as my aunt had written. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not courage exactly, but determination. This thing had haunted my family for generations. It had taken my uncle, slowly drained my aunt, and now it had come for me. Keeping my eyes on the shadow man, I backed up until I felt the desk behind me. My hand closed around my aunt's journal. "You can't have me," I said, my voice stronger now, "and you can't have this house anymore." The figure seemed to grow larger, looming over me, darkness spilling from it like smoke. The air grew so cold it burned my lungs. In desperation, I opened the journal to the ritual instructions and began to read aloud the chant my aunt had transcribed, butchering the pronunciation but pushing through nonetheless. The shadow man lunged forward, his form engulfing me in frigid darkness. For one terrifying moment, all I could feel was cold, and all I could see was black. Then, as the last words of the chant left my lips, a brilliant flash of light erupted from somewhere, everywhere, temporarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the small room was empty except for me. The flashlight had come back on, lying on the floor where I'd dropped it. The temperature was already returning to normal. Had it worked? Had I banished the shadow man, or merely disrupted him temporarily? I gathered the journal and a selection of my aunt's notebooks, then locked the room behind me. Whatever had just happened, I knew this wasn't over. The next 3 days passed in a blur of research and preparation. I barely slept, fueled by determination and coffee, while poring over my aunt's journals and notes. What I discovered both terrified and fascinated me. The entity known as the Shadow Man had existed in this area long before Oak Ridge was founded. The local Native American tribe, the Lenape, had stories of a darkness that stole peace from the mind and eventually claimed the body as well. They believed it lived in a cave system that was later built over, the very ground where my house now stood. In 1897, when Victor Blackwood built the Victorian, he unwittingly disturbed whatever had been contained. Within 3 years, he was found dead in the basement, his face frozen in an expression of utter terror. Since then, the entity had been tied to the house, unable to leave, but growing stronger with each new occupant it frightened. My uncle had apparently been particularly susceptible to its influence. His heart attack occurred in the basement after weeks of deteriorating mental health. My Aunt Meredith, however, had been different. After her husband's death, she'd approached the haunting with scientific curiosity rather than fear. She'd consulted with experts in the paranormal, anthropologists familiar with Lenape folklore, even physicists who studied theoretical dimensions. Her final theory was that the Shadow Man existed in a state between our physical world and somewhere else, another dimension or plane. It could affect our world in limited ways, manipulating temperatures, creating sounds, moving small objects, but its real power lay in its ability to access and influence the human mind. specifically the parts of our brain that process fear. I contacted the specialist whose information Dr. Morgan had given me. The phone was answered by a woman who identified herself only as Diana. She listened to my story without interruption, then said simply, "I'll be there tomorrow morning. Be prepared for a long day." Diana arrived precisely at 9 a.m. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her late 30s, with dark hair streaked with premature gray and sharp eyes that missed nothing as she surveyed the house. "You look like Meredith," she said. Same determined jaw. She refused my offer of coffee, instead asking to see the basement room immediately. Once there, she examined my aunt's materials efficiently. "Your aunt was brilliant," Diana commented. "She almost had it figured out." Almost? The ritual she designed would have worked, but she was too weak by the end to complete it. This entity had been feeding on her fear for decades, even if she'd learned to manage it. "So, what do we do now?" I asked. "We finish what she started." Diana reached into her bag and removed several items: white candles, a container of salt, a small silver bowl, and a bundle of dried herbs. "But first, you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't a ghost or a malevolent spirit. It's more like a parasite. It exists by feeding on human emotion, specifically fear. The stronger the fear, the stronger it becomes. The key to defeating it isn't confrontation, it's detachment. You need to acknowledge its existence without feeding it your fear." She fixed me with an intense gaze. "Can you do that, Jamie? Can you stand before something terrifying and feel nothing?" I wanted to say yes confidently, but I couldn't lie. "I don't know." "Then we'll find out together." At exactly midnight, we descended to the basement. The air was already colder than it should have been, our breath visible in the dim light of the electric lantern Diana had brought. We stepped inside a salt circle Diana had prepared, and she closed the gap behind us. She lit the candles one by one, murmuring something under her breath with each flame. The herbs went into the silver bowl, and when lit, produced a sweet, earthy smoke. "Begin," Diana instructed. I started the chant, my voice echoing against the stone walls. Diana joined me, our voices intertwining. With each repetition, the temperature dropped further. The candle flames bent and wavered as if in a strong wind. On the third repetition, the electric lantern went out, leaving only the candles for illumination. Their light seemed to be swallowed by the growing darkness that gathered in the corners of the basement. "Keep going," Diana urged. "Don't stop, no matter what." I continued the chant, even as the darkness began to take shape. It started as a vague shadow on the wall, then detached itself, growing more solid. The shadow man, larger than before, its form billowing like smoke but somehow substantial. It circled our salt ring, seeking entrance. Finding none, it began to change shape, morphing into monstrous forms, one after another. Diana's voice never faltered. Mine did, especially when the entity took on its next form, that of my uncle, his face contorted in terror. "It's not real," Diana said firmly. "It's fishing for your fear. Deny it." I forced myself to continue, though my hands shook and my heart hammered against my ribs. The chanting built to a crescendo, and as we reached the final lines, the shadow forms coalesced once more into the shadow man. It loomed over us, twice as tall as before, its featureless face now somehow conveying fury. It reached out, its arm elongating impossibly, stretching toward me across the salt barrier, which should have been impossible. Its fingers, long and thin like spider legs, almost touched my face. Diana grabbed my hand. "Now, Jamie, the last line. Put everything into it." I shouted the final words of the chant, my voice stronger than I thought possible. The smoke from the herbs swirled violently, rising to form a column between us and the shadow man. The entity recoiled, its form rippling like disturbed water. It made a sound then, the first sound I'd ever heard it make. A high, thin wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The candle flames shot upward, nearly reaching the ceiling, then abruptly extinguished themselves. For a moment, complete darkness enveloped us. In that darkness, I felt something brush against my mind, a cold, alien presence probing, searching for fear to latch onto. Instinctively, I began to panic. Then I remembered my aunt's words. Surrender fear completely. Instead of fighting the presence, I opened myself to it. I acknowledged its existence, acknowledged my fear, then let go. I stopped feeding it. I see you, I whispered into the darkness. I know what you are, and you have no power over me anymore. A sensation like static electricity ran through my body. The darkness seemed to compress inward, condensing into a single point of absolute blackness. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, light exploded through the basement. Diana's electric lantern came back on, revealing the basement exactly as it had been, except for one critical difference. The air felt lighter, cleaner somehow. Diana released my hand, her face shining with sweat but her eyes bright. You did it, she said simply. Is it gone? I asked. She shook her head. Not gone, contained. She pointed to the silver bowl, where the ashes of the herbs had formed a perfect black circle. This will hold it, but it needs to be kept safe. I understood then what my aunt had done, why she'd created the secret room, why she'd stayed in the house all those years. She hadn't just been researching the entity, she'd been its jailer. Diana carefully transferred the ashes to a small, ornate box. It felt heavier than it should have, and strangely cold. Until then, someone needs to be its guardian. Like my aunt was, I said quietly. Yes. She hoped it would end with her. She didn't want this burden to pass to you. Diana's expression softened. You don't have to accept it, Jamie. We can find another solution. I thought about leaving, about selling the house and returning to my old life in Philadelphia. But something held me back. Not fear this time, but responsibility. I'll stay, I decided. At least for now. That was 6 months ago. I've settled into a routine since then. I check the binding daily, maintain the protections weekly. I've continued my aunt's research, adding my own observations to her extensive notes. I've learned that the Shadow Man isn't unique to this house. There are others like it around the world, known by different names in different cultures. Diana has introduced me to a network of guardians like myself. Do I still get afraid sometimes? Of course. There are nights when I wake suddenly, certain I've heard shuffling footsteps in the hallway. Moments when I catch a glimpse of something dark moving at the edge of my vision. But the paralyzing terror is gone. I've looked directly into the darkness and survived. I've learned that acknowledging fear doesn't mean surrendering to it. Sometimes it means mastering it. So, if you're listening to this story in the darkness of your own room, if you're feeling that prickle on the back of your neck that suggests you might not be entirely alone, remember what I learned in that basement. See it, acknowledge it. Then take back your power, because the things that lurk in shadows can only hurt us if we let them. And if you've ever had an encounter with something you couldn't explain, something that defied rational thought, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Subscribe to join our community of shadow walkers, and hit that notification bell to make sure you never miss a story. After all, sometimes sharing our darkest experiences is the only way to bring them into the light. Sleep well, friends, and maybe keep a nightlight on, just in case. Story number 4. Have you ever felt that prickle on the back of your neck? That moment when you're absolutely certain someone or something is watching you? I experienced that feeling last summer, and what I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about our quiet little town of Pinewood Valley. If you've ever wondered what lurks in the shadows of rural America, you're about to find out. This story isn't just another campfire tale, it's my own experience. and I'm sharing it with you tonight because I need to know if anyone else has seen what I've seen. So get comfortable, maybe leave a small light on, and listen closely. And if you've had similar experiences, I'm begging you to share them in the comments below. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories from Pinewood Valley. Trust me, this is just the beginning. The story begins now. The first thing you should know about Millfield Farm is that it's been in my family for 4 generations. My grandpa used to tell me stories about how his father built that old red barn with his bare hands back in 1923. I never paid much attention to those tales when I was growing up in Chicago. City life had me more concerned with subway schedules than family history, but then my parents died in that car accident on Interstate 94. And suddenly, at 32 years old, I inherited a farm I barely remembered from childhood summer visits. Moving from my downtown Chicago apartment to a farmhouse in rural Wisconsin was an adjustment. The silence at night was deafening. No traffic sounds, no neighbors' music, just endless quiet, occasionally broken by the hoot of an owl or the distant yipping of coyotes. The farmhouse itself was charming, if dated. But that old barn, the one my great-grandfather built, that was another story entirely. It leaned slightly to one side, its red paint faded to a rusty pink in some places, peeling completely in others. I remember the first time I walked out to examine it, about a week after moving in. Mid-July heat had the cicadas singing in the tall grass. Sweat trickled down my back as I approached the structure, my boots leaving prints in the dusty path. "Just need some TLC," I muttered to myself, running my hand along the weathered wood. That's when I first felt it, that distinct sensation of being watched. I turned quickly, scanning the surrounding fields of swaying corn and the distant tree line. Nothing, just golden afternoon sunlight streaming across the property. "Get it together, Sarah," I scolded myself. "You're just not used to open spaces anymore." But as I circled around to the back of the barn, the feeling intensified. I stopped at the corner, suddenly reluctant to proceed. Something felt wrong. The air seemed different there, heavier somehow. Colder, despite the summer heat. I forced myself to peek around the edge of the barn. Nothing unusual, just more overgrown grass, an old rusted tractor part, and the beginning of the tree line about 50 yards back. And yet, I couldn't shake the conviction that something had been there. Had moved the instant before I looked. I stood perfectly still, listening. The cicadas had gone quiet. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. That's when I noticed the grass. Behind the barn, in a rough semicircle about 6 feet wide, the tall weeds were flattened. Not cut, not torn, just pressed down, as if something heavy had been resting there. Recently. I stepped closer, crouching to examine the flattened area. The grass was still green, still alive, just pushed down. In the center of the semicircle was a small dark patch. I reached out, touched it with my fingertip. It was damp and sticky. I pulled my hand back quickly, heart suddenly pounding. The substance was dark red-brown, like old blood. "Probably just an injured animal," I whispered, wiping my finger on my jeans. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The flattened area was too large for a fox. Too large for a deer, even. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old farmhouse had me sitting upright, straining to hear. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and went to the kitchen window, the one with a clear view of the barn, silvered by moonlight. Just as I was about to turn away, a shadow shifted at the back corner of the barn. It was so quick I might have imagined it. But then it happened again, a darkness that seemed to flow rather than walk, hugging the edge of the structure. I blinked hard, convinced my tired eyes were playing tricks. When I looked again, whatever it was had vanished. The next morning, I called the only person I knew in the area, Jim Kelly, the handyman who'd helped my parents maintain the property over the years. He arrived in a dust-covered pickup truck. a stocky man in his 60s with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Good to meet you finally, Miss Reynolds. Your dad spoke highly of you." He removed his cap briefly, then replaced it. "Sorry about your folks. They were good people." "Thank you, and please, call me Sarah." I led him around the property, pointing out various small repairs needed in the house. I saved the barn for last. "I found something strange yesterday behind the barn." I led him around to the back, but stopped short. "That's odd." The flattened grass was gone. The area looked completely normal, tall weeds swaying gently in the breeze. No sign of disturbance. No dark stain. Jim looked at me expectantly. "Something wrong?" I shook my head, confused. The grass was all pressed down yesterday, right here." He shrugged. "Could have been deer. They bed down sometimes in protected areas." "Maybe," I conceded, though I didn't believe it. "While I'm here," Jim said, changing the subject, "let me tell you about this old place. Might help you feel more at home." We walked back to the front of the barn and he helped me pull open the heavy doors. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of light that streamed through gaps in the walls. "Your great-grandfather, Elias Reynolds, was something of a local legend," Jim began. "Built this barn in just 2 months with help from folks all around." As I looked up at the complex wooden joinery of the roof beams, I noticed small, strange markings carved into the wood. "What are these?" I asked, pointing. Jim hesitated before answering. "Your great-grandfather had some unusual ideas about protection." "Protection from what?" He seemed to catch himself, looking briefly uncomfortable. "Just old tales. Probably nothing to them." But I wasn't going to let him change the subject. "Jim, please, I'm living here alone. If there's something I should know about this property, I'd rather hear it now." He sighed deeply. "The land your farm sits on. It has a history. Before your great-grandfather bought it, this area was considered problematic by the locals. Livestock would go missing. People reported strange noises, lights where no lights should be." I crossed my arms, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. "What are you saying? That my farm is, what, haunted?" Jim shook his head quickly. "Nothing like that. Your great-grandfather, he was a practical man. Said he didn't believe in superstition, but..." He hesitated again. "When he built this barn, he took certain precautions." He walked over to one of the main support beams and pointed to the series of small marks carved into the wood. "These are on every main beam, and buried under each corner post are items. For protection," Elias claimed. I ran my fingers over the carvings. "Protection from what exactly?" Jim's voice was barely above a whisper. "The old-timers called it the Watcher in the Fields. Said it was here long before the first settlers arrived." "A watcher? Like a person?" He shook his head. "Not a person, no." The way he said it made my skin crawl. "Your great-grandfather claimed he found a way to contain it. Make a sort of arrangement." As he turned to leave the barn, he paused. "One piece of advice, if you don't mind. The old-timers, they say never to go behind the barn after dark, especially during a new moon." I swallowed hard. "Why especially then?" "That's when it hungers most," he said simply, then walked out into the sunlight. That night, I explored the upstairs of the farmhouse more thoroughly. In my grandfather's old office, I found a heavy oak desk, bookshelves packed with agricultural journals, and a large chest in the corner. The chest was locked, but I found a key that fitted in an old cookie tin in the kitchen. Inside were stacks of papers, mostly farm records dating back to the 1920s. But at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, I found a leather-bound journal with my great-grandfather's name, Elias Reynolds, and the date 1923. Most entries were mundane details of weather patterns and crop yields. But as I flipped through the yellowed pages, I began to notice references to the arrangement and the binding, often accompanied by crude drawings similar to the symbols in the barn. One entry in particular caught my attention. First, frost came early. The binding holds, but it tests the boundaries with each new moon. Left the offering as agreed. Found it gone by morning. I frowned, rereading the passage. Offering? What offering? Several pages later, I found another entry. Monthly offerings continue as agreed. Margaret questions the necessity, but she wasn't here. She didn't see what it did to Sullivan and his family. Some prices are worth paying for safety. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. My great-grandfather, who I'd always heard described as a practical, no-nonsense farmer, seemed to have been involved in something unexplainable. The journal entries continued with occasional references to the Watcher and regular mentions of offerings left behind the barn. The final entry that mentioned the arrangement was dated September 29, 1945. 22 years since the binding. My son understands now the importance of maintaining the arrangement. I've shown him how to prepare the offerings, how to strengthen the markings when they fade. The Watcher has been contained all these years. The farm has prospered. May it continue long after I am gone. As night fell, I found myself growing increasingly uneasy. Every creak of the old structure had me looking over my shoulder. I took a flashlight and walked to the window that overlooked the barn. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, as the last light faded from the west, I saw it again, that flowing shadow hugging the edge of the barn. This time, it paused at the corner, and I had the distinct impression it was looking toward the house, looking at me. My phone rang suddenly, making me jump. By the time I'd answered it and returned to the window, the shadow was gone. "Hello?" My voice sounded strained, even to my own ears. "Sarah, it's Jim Kelly, just checking that everything's all right." "Jim, I need to ask you something. Do you know anything about offerings?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Jim spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "Where did you hear about that?" I found my great-grandfather's journal. He mentioned leaving offerings behind the barn, part of some arrangement. Another pause. "Your father maintained the tradition, asked me not to mention it. Thought you might find it distressing. What exactly was he leaving out there?" The journal never specifies. "Nothing sinister," Jim said. "Meat, mostly, once a month, on the new moon." My mind flashed to the dark, sticky stain I'd found in the flattened grass. And this Watcher, what exactly is it supposed to be? I've never seen it clearly, just glimpses, like a shadow where no shadow should be. "You can't seriously believe what I believe doesn't matter much," Jim interrupted. "But I do know this. Your family farm has never suffered a single unexplained livestock death. Never had a mysterious fire or crop failure. In farming, that kind of luck isn't common." I thought about the shadow I'd seen twice now. And if the offerings stop, the silence that followed was answer enough. "The new moon is tomorrow night," Jim finally said. "There's a butcher shop in Pinewood Valley, Clausen's. They'll know what to prepare if you mention it's for the Reynolds farm." The next morning, I drove to Pinewood Valley. Clausen's butcher shop was easy to spot, its storefront marked by a vintage sign featuring a cartoon pig. Behind the counter stood a heavyset man in his 40s. "Morning," he greeted. "You must be Sarah Reynolds. Jim called to say you might be stopping by." I blinked, taken aback. Word travels fast. Small town. Plus, new owner of the Reynolds place? That's big news around here. He wiped his hands on his apron. "Jim mentioned you'd need the usual." "The usual," I repeated. "For behind the barn." Clausen's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of understanding? Fear? He nodded once. "Give me a minute to prepare it." He returned with a paper-wrapped package. "On the house," he said as I reached for my wallet. "Reynolds tradition." "What exactly is in there?" I asked, taking the surprisingly heavy package. "Best not to ask too many questions about some traditions," he replied. Just leave it where your father did, before moonrise tonight." As I turned to go, he added, "And Miss Reynolds, stay inside after dark tonight. New moon special around these parts." Back at the farmhouse, I placed the package in the refrigerator and tried to distract myself with chores. In a box labeled Family Photos, I found a collection of old albums. In a very old, fragile album, I discovered a faded photograph of my great-grandfather standing in front of the newly built barn. What caught my attention was the background of the image. While most of the photograph was clear, there appeared to be a smudge or shadow at the corner of the barn. A photographic imperfection, most likely. But given everything else, I turned the photo over. In faded ink, someone had written, "Barn raising complete. The binding holds. August 1923. The sun was just beginning to set when I finally worked up the courage to take the package outside. The paper-wrapped bundle felt heavier than before, and a dark stain had begun to seep through one corner. The walk to the barn seemed longer than usual. As I rounded the corner to the back, I stopped short. The area behind the barn had changed again. The grass was flattened in a perfect circle about 8 feet in diameter. In the center was a shallow depression in the earth, like a crude bowl formed in the soil. My hands trembling slightly, I placed the package in the depression. As I did, I noticed more of those strange symbols carved into the back wall of the barn, previously hidden by tall grass. I backed away slowly, unable to shake the feeling that I was being observed. The air felt thicker somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something rustled in the grass beyond the tree line. I froze, straining to see in the fading light. Nothing visible, but the rustling continued, moving closer, coming toward the barn, toward me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The rustling grew louder, closer, then stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. A sound like breathing. Deep, ragged breathing. But wrong somehow. Not like any human or animal I'd ever heard. Finally, my paralysis broke. I turned and ran, not looking back, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I was inside the farmhouse. The door locked behind me. Curtains drawn over every window. For hours, I sat in the darkened living room, jumping at every sound. Around midnight, curiosity finally overcame fear. I crept to the kitchen window and peered out toward the barn. The full moon provided enough light to see the structure clearly. For several minutes, nothing moved. Then, slowly, a darkness detached itself from the shadows at the forest edge. Not a shadow itself, but something darker, more substantial. It flowed rather than walked, moving with a terrible grace toward the back of the barn. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp as it passed into my line of sight. In the moonlight, its form was indistinct, a blackness darker than the night around it, vaguely humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin in some places, too bulky in others, and where its face should have been, only deeper darkness. It reached the back of the barn and paused. Then it seemed to fold somehow, collapsing in on itself as it settled over the spot where I'd left the package. I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I retreated to the center of the house, curled up on the sofa with all the lights on, and waited for dawn. When morning finally came, I ventured outside again. The package was gone. The flattened circle of grass remained, but the depression in the center was now slightly larger, slightly deeper. And on the edge of the circle I found something that made my blood run cold. A small object, roughly carved from dark wood. It was a tiny barn, perfect in every detail, right down to miniature versions of the protective symbols carved into its beams. A message? A warning? A thank you? I didn't know. But as I held the small carving in my palm, I realized I'd made my choice. By leaving the offering, I'd acknowledged the arrangement. I'd become part of it. That afternoon, I called Jim. "I need to know everything," I said when he answered. Everything about the Watcher, about what my family has been doing all these years. We met at a diner in town. Jim explained more of the history, how the Native Americans who lived in this region called the area the place between, a thin spot where things could cross over from another world. Your great-grandfather found a way to contain it, Jim said. The symbols, the monthly offerings. He created a boundary it couldn't cross, centered on the barn, made an arrangement, regular tribute in exchange for protection. Protection from what? From itself. The bargain wasn't just to keep it away, it was to harness its power. The Reynolds farm has never suffered drought when others did, never had pest infestations or crop failures. Even that tornado in '87 that destroyed 3 neighboring properties somehow curved around your family's land. So all these years my family has been feeding this thing, appeasing it, coexisting, Jim corrected, on agreed terms. Your great-grandfather was a practical man. He understood sometimes you make accommodations with forces you can't defeat. He gave me a small key before we parted. Your father gave me this last year, asked me to pass it to you if anything happened to him before he could explain everything. Back at the farm, I discovered the key opened a small hidden compartment in the central beam of the barn. Inside was a metal box containing a smaller leather-bound notebook. The first page bore my great-grandfather's distinctive handwriting. To my descendants and keepers of the arrangement. Herein lies the complete truth of the binding and the renewal. Read carefully, prepare thoroughly. The continuance of all we have built depends upon it. A small yellowed photograph showed my great-grandfather standing beside the newly built barn. Behind him, partially visible at the edge of the frame, was a tall, impossibly thin figure with proportions subtly wrong. Where its face should have been was only darkness, but in that darkness, 2 points of light, like distant stars. Written on the back, "The Watcher acknowledges the binding. August 1923. May God forgive what I have done to ensure our safety." As I read the notebook in the fading daylight, I didn't immediately notice the change in the air around me. The sudden drop in temperature. The way the shadows deepened in the corners. It was only when I heard that distinctive breathing that I looked up. The barn doors were still open, framing the reddish glow of sunset, and in that frame stood a silhouette. Not human, not animal. Something tall and impossibly thin in some places, unnaturally broad in others. A darkness deeper than the growing night behind it. The Watcher had come early. It had sensed my discovery. The binding symbols began to glow faintly, casting an eerie blue light. In that ghostly illumination I could see it more clearly, though parts of it seemed to shift and change as I looked. It stopped about 10 feet away. The darkness where its face should have been rippled slightly, and within that void, 2 points of light appeared, like the eyes in the photograph, but brighter now, watching me. Then, to my shock, it spoke, not in words, but directly into my mind. A voice like stones grinding together. "New keeper, the renewal approaches. You have found the terms. Will you honor the arrangement?" I swallowed hard, clutching the notebook to my chest. I need time to understand. The figure seemed to consider this. The points of light flared briefly. Time is granted, until the next new moon. Then you must decide. Continue the binding. Oregon release what has been contained. It began to turn away, then paused. The darkness of its form swirling like smoke. Your blood made a clever bargain, new keeper. Consider carefully before you reject it. With that, it flowed backward toward the open doors until it was just a shadow among shadows, and then nothing at all. That night, I read the notebook from cover to cover. I learned the true nature of the Watcher, an entity neither good nor evil in human terms, but ancient and powerful. I learned what would be required of me to maintain the arrangement. As dawn broke, I made my decision. I would remain on the farm. I would maintain the arrangement. I would prepare for what would come next, just as generations of my family had done before me. Because some bargains, once made, cannot be unmade without terrible cost. 2 days later, Jim found me in the barn, carefully repainting the binding symbols where they had faded. "So, you've decided," he said, watching me work. I nodded, not looking up from the intricate pattern I was restoring. "I have." "Your father would be proud," Jim said quietly. "It takes courage to accept this kind of responsibility." I finally met his eyes. Not courage, practicality, same as my great-grandfather. I gestured to the freshly painted symbols. "The arrangement benefits everyone. Breaking it would be selfish." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Jim, thank you for helping me understand." He paused in the doorway. "That's what neighbors do, especially in a place like this." He glanced back at me. "See you at the next new moon?" "I'll be here," I confirmed. "For that one, and many more to come." After he left, I returned to my work, carefully refreshing each symbol, each line of the binding that had protected my family and the wider community for a century. Behind the barn, the flattened circle of grass had regrown, erasing all evidence of the offering. But I knew it was there, waiting, the watcher in the fields, my farm's oldest resident, my strangest protector. And as I worked, I could feel it watching, waiting for the next new moon, for the next offering. For now, we had an understanding, this ancient entity and I. A bargain made by my ancestors that I would honor, because sometimes the devil you know is better than the chaos of the unknown. Sometimes the monsters we feed are preferable to the ones we unleash. End of story. Hey there, hope you enjoyed this little journey into the mysteries of Pinewood Valley. If this story gave you goosebumps or kept you listening longer than you planned, hit that subscribe button right now. I've got so many more tales to share about the strange happenings in rural America's forgotten corners. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have continued the arrangement with the Watcher, or would you have tried to break free? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you've ever experienced something inexplicable on an old property or heard family stories about arrangements with things that shouldn't exist, share those too. You might be surprised how many others have similar experiences. Next week, I'll be sharing the story of the Whispering Well at Blackwood Farm, another tale that blurs the line between local legend and terrifying reality. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Until next time, remember, sometimes those prickles on the back of your neck are trying to tell you something, and sometimes it's better not to look behind you.